So great to see you here. Hopefully the rest make it from the Oktoberfest from Munich back as well. And so let's begin with the second lecture. So this lecture will be on one time a little bit more definition-like, but on the other side we have a lot of practical examples that we want to show. And we have to say we have found this technique quite recently as a method that can be helpful to have a very structured way to set up those procedural models, the 3D models. It's a technique which had been there already since the classical period of the Greek and the Roman ages. It's about so-called form-based codes, conventions, how to plan cities, to have design guidelines. And somehow in our age where we have very much somehow fixated ourselves on legal regulations and so on, we had been tending in urban planning and regional development that we more and more have legal texts instead of having a representation what actually those texts actually mean. And that comes to some part to developments that cities look like they do right now. For instance, we have certain kind of regulations that allow larger parking allotments, for instance, instead to say where to place them to maintain architecture and urban qualities. And to overcome this, a group of urban designers in the US developed or reinitiated the so-called form-based codes in the late 80s, early 90s. One has to say that this is highly connected to, as well, to try to find an answer to this urban sprawl in the US, to reinitiate urban redevelopment, and as well then connected to new urbanism. But I will say something about new urbanism as well later on, since it is highly debatable. And okay. So this is one guy of the new urbanism here. And he just said, Peter Katz, one of the inventors of new urbanism, cities have to move to a new system. They should look at the streets they like and the public spaces they like, and then write the rules to get more of what they like and less what they don't. Conventional zoning doesn't do that. It just gives a use and a density, and then you hope for the best. So, okay. So this is, on the one side, of course, very much connected to urban design and urban planning. On the other side, in this course, we are not focusing so much on urban design and planning, but we like to give you some tools that you can, with your own thoughts, later on reapply for your studio, things that you want to pursue. Here in this course, all the techniques that we present today are more like gathering techniques of information. And there we like to start again and go next slide. So form-based code. Somehow the text looks a bit funny. Huh? We will talk shortly about the hierarchy in urban planning, urban design. What are development strategies? This is something I guess you already know, master plan, design briefs, development frameworks. Then we come maybe to something new for you, so-called regulating plan and the form-based code, the principle of form-based code, and then we will show some examples, even if it is not called form-based code. We have some recent examples, for instance, the whole design guideline repository of Fosters and Partners for Mazda in Abu Dhabi is based on a form-based code, and that would show you something what you could maybe have as a visual reference, what it can be useful of, and how you could use it later on. Then we show some examples and the components, and we discuss somehow the benefits and drawbacks. So basically, I hope it's large enough, the text. It's good? Okay. We could say we have something like a very high-level tools in urban design and planning, and then we have low-level tools. So to say, as well on the scales. So the development strategies on those parts, there's a big pictures actually established. What are the big principles that should be developed, and how should this pursued? And this is usually done with conceptual diagrams and like first kind of group meetings or interviews. And then we have development frameworks where we have a more or less better idea of the urban structure that should be achieved later on. And already like these key indicators, what should be the infrastructure, what are the land parcel size, what are the uses and so on, is denoted here. And then we have the so-called regulating plan. And the regulating plan is already something very, very formal and form-based. It already goes into how should be the zones and the areas more from an architectural point of view, not from a definition point of view. Oh, this is industrial zoning. No, it's more like you go along kind of street plans and you evaluate what will be actually the outlook of the streets, what will be the view, the street canyon, what will be the interaction of the people from the societal point of view on the block level. And then we have the classical master plans. Actually, master plan is an unfortunate word since everything is in flux and already is readapting and so on. So here we go into 3 dimensions, and infrastructure and everything else is, as you already know, is defined, and what kind of architecture character and materials and so on. And then on the very, very low level, then together with the people on site that are living there, then the site-specific design briefs are done. So maybe a few of you know that already, that picture. That was the big idea when already, I guess it was already 10 years ago, the idea was pushed how actually is the ETH Hünkeberg connected to the city and to the world. And somehow over the last years from 2000 backwards to the 80s and so on, the Hünkeberg seems to be at ETH, as the ETH campus, something which is very, very disconnected from the centrum and as well from the world, so to say, with the cowbells that you hear now in this foggy fall season here. You don't see the cows where they are hiding. But anyway, so actually, so this was the idea to establish a new kind of frame. What would be the brand of the ETH Hünkeberg campus? And then the idea of Science City arose. Today is a bit different since politics changed at ETH, and there are different people now in charge, and they have a slightly different view and opinion on that. But then, since for most of the employees of ETH and of the students, it was actually a distraction to go to Hünkeberg, since it's like just the outskirt of Zurich, and then a new image had to be pushed, and as well a development strategies for the further growth of the ETH Hünkeberg campus. And therefore there was a big initiative coming straight from the top, from the Schulleitung, that the idea of Science City had been pushed. And with Science City, master plans had been evolved, and as well they had to overcome, maybe you heard of that, there was a very unfortunate problem with the nowadays HCI building over there. It was too high in the first place, and it had been rejected by the Swiss society. And so they had to redo everything and like postpone the opening of a new building, opening of a new labor institute, laboratories, and as well to postpone new professorships and so on and so on. It was really like a big mess for ETH itself. And so they learned. So they had to do something which is on the one side a communication thing to lay out what are existing connections, to strengthen actually what is already there and what needs to become. And this was put in this imagery way as there are different kind of visualizations from that, and there used to be until 2 years from now until the alumni lounge was opened, a Science City exhibition, where you could see all these development strategies for ETH, and all the Science City talks on the weekends and so on was like started from here. And then we have that development frameworks which are used to classify and to analyze what is the existing stakes inside a city. Then what would be, for instance, a crucial key parameter, for instance here, the pink circle here. The idea is that you have in that range like 5 minutes walk route. So that was one of the key development goals here in this framework, that you always maintain this 5-minute circle for the inner core of the redevelopment area here. So that's in comparison to that one. This is highly pictorial. It's more like for communicating an idea, like a big hypothesis, what it should later look like. Here it's already like very in detail. You go here inside your urban plan to almost to the parcels and say what is your dedicated granularity of different kind of uses and what are the key performance indicators. For instance, if you want to have a walkable city. And then you come to the regulating plan with the form-based code approach. For instance, you define zones along the streets, or beside the streets, could be on a parcel, where a certain program is established and a certain kind of form-based rule is applied. For instance here, okay, this very American example, what you have here. For instance, here you have all the ways in front of your stores, for instance, as a general rule, and all this is maintained here in the town core. You will always find something like the similar front as here. And that is the easy notion to bring that in your urban plan. If you have like a design, a building or zoning law, usually you have something like an abstract text, where just you have the description. Here in that case, the form-based codes, you have a reference section, for instance, how actually this area should look like. Or what would be the amount of setbacks that is allowed, or which line should be followed along the street. So that's a major difference. And then, of course, from there, from this initial definition, you come to master plans. And master plans, yeah, Science City is a good example, I guess, here. A lot of principles have been, as well, form-based codes. Kees Christians is using a lot of form-based codes inside his office. He has a different kind of naming for it, but in generally it's similar to that. A very clear structure had been developed, and as well with this Congress Boulevard and so on, and here with the living, everything else is very, very shortly connected to each other, and the old fabric of the old campus is still maintained. And maybe some of you know already this building typologies for the Olympic Park in London and so on. He poses a lot of form-based regulations as well. And then it goes deeper to meetings with the stakeholders. It can be inhabitants or like PPP involved parties, private-public partnerships. And then you set up like a definition. What are the goals, what you want to pursue, and what are in the end the collected form-based codes for your city development. As you see here already, this is like a typical romantic image of new urbanism in the US. So what is the main difference between form-based codes and the traditional approaches that we have here? So the land use-based, zoning law and so on, you're mainly concentrating on the use. How is the use distributed along your city? And what are the processes to put it later on in form? With the form-based, you think on that mainly what is actually the pictures you want to achieve of your city and how can you put it actually in use. So I guess either this one can be just used alone. Of course, there has to be an exchange between both of them. But if we understand more, not just the form as something which is defining aesthetics that we want to pursue, if we understand more that form can be used as well for passive design strategies, like something like that, we can save energy. If we do our definition of our form-based catalog, right? Then it's a different thing here, especially if we then reconnect it to the traditional methods, which have the on the one side like the problems that they're very kind of legal regulation based, but on the other side they have a legal implementation. So this one usually don't have a legal implementation. So you're talking about forms and shapes. A lawyer usually doesn't do that, and the judge, if he has to decide, there has to be something very concrete. So we could use this approach not just to have a very conservative image of the city of the southern states in the US. We could use this very much as well to define performative architecture on urban scale. And of course, open that kind of key indicators that we use in the shapes that help us to pursue passive design strategies or to implement PV panels and so on urban scale. We can use that as well to leverage new form of architectures, modernistic architectures as well. So maybe just a short comparison here. So as I said, the traditional zoning, the emphasis is on use, and here it's more on social life or maintaining an architectural quality on a block scale. Just maps from the traditional zoning are just zoning districts. They had been once defined maybe 100 years ago for some reason. And even now, from different kind of views, they don't make so much sense any longer since there are new kind of quarters inside, for instance, Kreis 4 or like Zürich West. You have now somehow smaller nucleus inside, which are already forming totally different identities within that old zone districts. So it's actually, you could say, at some place it's overhauled. And here we have more like the definition from bottom up, like we have neighborhoods or certain kind of streets that form like a social fabric or maybe an architectural fabric, and these are then the little parts of it. So here it's more the property management and the right placement of the buildings. So you have somehow some charts, you have to cover 66% or not more than 66% of your ground area. And here it's more about, oh, we have now a street with some retail, maybe we should put some office and some living conditions as well there. And so on. So in that case, I think what can be seen here, it may be like a two steps that you have. First, you have the initial definition on the key values that you want to have in your zoning, and then you can put it maybe in shape and bring it a step further and redefine. So maybe one should talk about like a two-step zoning. So, as already mentioned, primary regulates use. It's not very friendly to understand for somebody who's actually a layman. Even now in Zurich, if you just want to have just talking for my personal life, you want just to have a little playground installed on your front yard, you have to study that, and then you're eventually even not allowed to have some playground toys to install in your front yard because it's not allowed. But you have to really read through everything, and then you have to talk to somebody else who should know that it's a city department, and yeah. Okay, and then it's not very flexible. Even if you say that kind of playground, for instance, is just maybe 5 years because it's wood, and then the kids are too old and they won't use it any longer. It's not flexible. If you once have it, put it in on your parcel as a right, then it is there forever, for 100, 200 years. Doesn't make sense. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it leads even to mediocrity and conformity. So you have the conformity, but mediocre architecture. And it's usually just defining the minimum requirements or the maximum allowed space, what you can take or what you can do. And that is not very sensible. Anyhow, this, as I said, this form-based codes coming from your urbanism, and as you see here, this picture of a town is something what this new urbanism guys really much anticipate. So for them, they come actually from that direction that new urbanism was used to overcome urban sprawl in the US. And one idea was to actually link traditional themes that have a certain kind of maybe very Republican lifestyle and a perfect image of a perfect life, that certain kind of traditional schemes are reused. Because some of the new urbanism had the idea initially that if you have the right surrounding, you won't have any kind of crime and so on. And very, very confused reasoning sometimes here. But the good thing is about, it's a framework against urban sprawl. Maybe on some parts it makes sense to think about some kind of traditionalist architectural development schemes if it's about to preserve a certain kind of image of a urban dwelling area or of an inner city area. But in general, we have here in Europe's opinion that this thinking is a kind of backward oriented, and we should further go on. So, coming from here, we should just think about that as form-based codes are tools that we can use. It has a lot of good things, but a lot of philosophy. Maybe we should overthink that. But generally, the principles of the form-based codes are like they are vision-centered. You create a vision, a picture of your of the thing that you want to develop. You have a priority in your vision. What is the target that you want to pursue? What it will really look like in shape. It has a situation where it's place-based, and it should be adapted to the regional context. And now it's a marketing text here, consequential and precise, but it's really integrated, as I will show you, and it's predictable, and you can even adjust it and put it to the local context. So I will just now go through the components of the form-based code. One is the regulating plan, public space standards, some examples for building form standards, and then in the meantime I will just jump to a different presentation of Foster and Partner. So the first example is the smart code framework. Actually, this smart code is an example of a form-based code, and it's open source. So there's a lot of material on the net. You can have a look on that. You can download InDesign files. You have a catalog that you can use to make an urban survey, to set up all the profile for your development area and as well for your new development. And it can, I guess, for a lot of you, it can be helpful for as well for urban design studios, I think so. The idea is here that you have a very well-defined structure. There's a lot of definitions that maybe not all of you need to read for your studies here at ETH, but if you get the kind of glimpse from here, maybe some kind of questions that you usually need to answer within your design proposals are already like pre-classified and could give a hint. And then, oh, this is very text-like, huh? Not very form-based code, but then it goes into right away into classifications. What are the pieces, the parts inside your city that you want to define? And what are the parts of cities that you want to define? Is it more or less, is it not a city, maybe it's just very rural, or is it really like a high density urban development area? And then you can come with different kind of tools to set up as well, like from the street profiles, from the LAs, and so on. There are a lot of tools available and tables how you can classify certain kind of stereotypes that you want to have inside, and even what are the transacts from one zone to another. And yeah, and there's a PDF. Yeah, so maybe I should show the PDF. Sorry. And do you have it open already? The first site already. Okay, good. Here? Great. Sorry. Yeah. So I can do the same with this one. Yeah. So I will show some examples here. For instance, you have like a section how we classify certain kind of densities. So for instance, here is it's very urbanized, on the other side is very rural, more like a nature zone. And then for in between, you have to classify that one, you have like really different kind of scales and so-called articles, where you go to a definition, what is the target of your regional scale plan, what is the community scale plan, so what will the development look like, and what are then finally the buildings. And why I'm showing this to you? Because you will have an exercise using that tool to classify the existing fabric of Altstätten with that one. So we have some more pictures here. Sorry. Street sections. For instance, how are the corners defined? Something that you can do very easily here. Usually these are typical components that you don't have any time and place, or how is the alignment of buildings on a lot alike. what is the zoning of the buildings, what is the height regulation, and that brought together with the performance evaluation of the buildings is something really rather new. For instance, if you have a kind of a street canyon section and you really know what is the sunlight shading effect because you do it right, what is the heat island effect if you don't introduce certain kind of dimensions for the height of the building, for the materials of the building, and for maybe urban vegetation and so on. These are things that you can use for classifying the urban performance and as well to find out what may be some points that you should actually rework. So now I have to get my pointer. So okay. So again, the regulating plan, usually this will be for the exercise for you, for instance. You will take here like a map of Altstetten, of a defined area that I show later on. And you will find out what are the similarities along streets. What kind of building, what kind of uses are on the street side? What is the street canyon behaving? What are the architectural components here? And then you will find there are similarities and dissimilarities, and there are things that I can personally cluster into groups. And if you have that kind of clusters, you denote that kind of clusters in that street plan. So then inside these clusters you have of course a repository of buildings and the definition of the buildings on the parcel lot side. What is the layout, how they are placed, what are the components on the pedestrian, and all this kind of parts will be used in a kind of structured manner in a like urban survey catalogs that you create to define what will be the initial rule base, what is the existing city about. And this is not a very new idea. In biology, it's kind of very often used to define ecosystems and so on. For instance, they make like a transaction between here on the shorelines, the part of the ocean, what are the pieces inside, what they find, what kind of water qualities, what kind of sediments are here, what kind of plants and animals are there. The same for the beach, you make the section here and make a definition of that, and so on and so on. And we will do something similar, such kind of transaction through the city part of Altstetten here. So they are typical, like as I already introduced, like there is very rural, like natural zoning where almost no human influence is there. Then there is rural, like you have some farming houses and some fields and agri use. And then you have the suburban dwellings, and then the more like garden city-like neighborhoods, which are more dense, and then you come until up to the urban core. And of course, there are like certain kind of exclamations that are special districts for development, like business parks and so on. And this can be done very efficiently with this one. You define just a certain kind of route through your urban part of your, through the city, and from there you do this classification and you define for each set what seems to be the existing dominant regulation or not regulation, what is the existing dominant form for the high-rise, for the mid-rise, and how is the pedestrian done, and so on, all those kind of ingredients of your urban development. Then this can be used as well to define what will be the new development goals or the predominant goals to face the outlook of the city. So for instance, if you have defined, find out that with this survey there are a lot of discrepancies in architectural qualities, or maybe there is a need for unification, then this can be used to lay out a new kind of plan for frontage-based, street canyon-based design, where you then, ideally for each kind of typology, if it's more like suburban or very high density, and in this case here, where you have to find out what are the most appropriate patterns for that. The same for the subdivision of blocks, and to find out what is the best organic fabric for having this quarter-based approaches. So another examples here. So the already 3D-like building shapes here, US-based. And maybe to show some of it, we have just how it can be useful. And we have some animations prepared. So therefore, maybe you can put it on the middle screen or somewhere else, or left and right. Okay, yeah. So this is a very short footage about, this is like the architectural image after the urban renovation plan, what it could look like. And then you will see how it looked like before. So this is the actual development. Then in the analysis you will, so this is the part of what you will do. Right now you will make a catalog of these parts of the city. And then, so finding all the important lines to make a classification into a building catalog, for instance, here. In that case, here a measure had been found. It should be like, the front should be reorientated to the city side and not to the very informal gated community center between in this courtyard like it was before. And then the wall should be opened, and then they made all this kind of additions, what makes it more like a park-like structure. You see now, this is the typical new urbanism approach. All this here looks like it right now. Enlarging the pedestrian, creating a new code for having a harmonized building height. And of course it has to be green. So here this is very interesting. Now it looks like that. Like pedestrian safety. So not just having nice fancy homes introduced, as well like all that kind of details like safety issues to make it really like a walkable city. So these are the codes now, right now, the form-based codes. And this could be like what an architectural implementation in the US, for instance, could look like. So, very romantic, huh? Here, similar example, now it looks like that. Instead just of having that kind of boxes here, maybe there is like first floor, like 1/3 of the first floor could be used as a different use. And if you add some green and some coffee bars, everything is perfect. So great. Okay. This one was hiding before. So this is like somehow is certain kind of sprawl where just have two developments here, and you have to somehow fill these empty holes. And usually, if you don't predefine, something very differently could appear here in US. We don't have that much problem here in Switzerland, since everything's almost occupied. So now we have Home Sweet Home. Okay. So, do you have questions or feedback onto that?
Yeah, one question, is it really made?
Sorry?
Have they made it, constructed out of the...
Sorry, again?
Is it built? Does it exist, or is it...
So these examples are real examples. They really went to these towns. One was Savannah, then there's some smaller cities, more towns, as used for town redevelopment. Yes, these are real cases. It's really used. So they have a lot of references actually, and they put it into implementation from the like from 2005 on. There are very prominent examples that are recently used. Before it was just more very theoretic idea from the early 90s starting on, and had been used sequentially in some parts. In Florida it started initially. As somebody saw on the Truman Show, this film, so this seaside, Florida, was been built with the smart code. So actually by the inventors of the smart code. So you can have really like your perfect city with that. No problems any longer. Okay, yeah, okay, the same images again. About, yeah. So what can we do with that actually? What are the potentials for us now? No? So for us, we can create a repository of all prominent urban forms. So this is what we want to do in this course mainly here. We can then, if we have that, we can reevaluate the performance of the zone definitions. Do they make sense at all, the existing ones? And we can as well evaluate what are the qualities, the architectural ones, that these forms put actually in shape. And we can use that as an input for parametric urban model, which we can use as well to bring in new designs brought by ourselves, and as well to evaluate what is the wind flow, what is the sunlight shading, all that kind of performance indicators, as well what are all this kind of surface reportings that we have, like what's the floor area ratio, really, not just guessed, and so on for urban development. So actually, this was already kind of diagnostics and goals, what we can do with that. We can create from there a so-called rule-based 3D city model for evaluation. You can evaluate the potentials for passive design. And even for investment strategies, we can get very good insights from here. And as well to identify, actually this should be put a bit higher, identifying architectural development goals to overcome actually the shortcomings which are in that area. The next thing, which is most of the time is very underestimated, is community education. That means if you are an urban designer and you want to go with your design somewhere, you have usually to deal with laymen. You have sometimes very well-educated ones, but still you have to communicate your designs that you want to actually create with them. Therefore, it's very important that you have a visualization at hand and you have a visual language for the changes, and as well to empower these architectural qualities that you want to pursue. The next thing is that you can have that digital urban models for the zoning law evaluation, and following from there, you can create sustainability criteria for urban growth and evaluate it. So this will be very prominent parts that we will do in this course. And even now, you can make certain kind of alternatives out of this repository. This can be used to have like different kind of design proposals standing next to each other and having the same structure, and that you can then better evaluate. So now, before I go now to the Zürich-Altstetten area, I want to show you a very practical example of Foster and Partner, where he used, well, the office of Foster and Partner mainly, used form-based code to define the first autark CO2 neutral city of the world. Do we have still the connection to the folder here, or okay? Okay. Ah yeah, here it is. Okay. So actually, Masdar in Abu Dhabi is now a city which really comes into shape right now. It had some problems. There was a first economic crisis in the mid-2000s, which nearly stopped the idea of Masdar. And you have to see that Masdar should become something like the first outlet in building technologies and energy technologies for the Middle Eastern world. So the idea is quite averse the existing schemes that you just have another Dallas erected, like in Dubai and so on. And now this comes really like the idea that you have a lot of traditional schemes and development of Arab cities like Shiban, for instance, in Yemen, that has been interpreted and taken into account all the traditional knowledge about passive ventilations and so on, and combined with very, very new and modern building technologies. So you have both. You have the passive aspect and you have the alternative energy active regulating aspect inside the city. Okay. I think it will take the keyboard or pointer back again. New Acrobat is strange. Okay. So just going briefly through it. You can see here, this is basically Abu Dhabi, more or less. And here, this little piece here is Masdar. A bit more. I think it's really directly connected to the international airport of Abu Dhabi. And the idea was that they had analyzed different kind of community types, how all that kind of neighborhoods are there. Since they are creating a synthetic city, they started first with the social connections inside. Then they wanted to have like a complete community coming from there, and one idea was to have walkability, which is now the biggest problem actually in Dubai, for instance. Everything has to be driven by car or by something else, since it's just too hot. If you're outside the building, you have these urban heat islands by the wrong building designs, caused by the wrong building designs. You have up to 70 degrees Celsius, just outside air temperature, not the direct sunlight temperature, which could be somehow higher already. So here, one of the key goals was that you can be outside, like 150 meters walking range. Now they readapted that to something like 200 seconds walking range and something like that. So they had to become more realistic. Okay. So that was like the initial ideas. And they made a lot of surveys of existing shapes and forms from Arab countries or Mediterranean countries, as they wanted to have the same images. And they wanted to have later on, so this is the initial rendering of the idea of Masdar. You can see here in the outskirts of the city, you have here solar farming. You have here this round thingies here, which is basically just car parks. So the idea is that all the people, which is very crazy by the way, because they want to have a very pedestrian-centered city. So they say, okay, you can drive under the borders on the city by car, instead of implementing as well different kind of traffic means that could help out as well. Okay, so basically the people drive here by cars, then they have autonomous automated cars which are driving along. You can just go downstairs and say, okay, I want to go into the center, I want to go there, and then eventually a pond will arrive, you can hop in and drive. So recently they had some problems with the financing of that, but it seems to be that later on they can solve that, but yeah, still they have to cope with a lot of things here. So basically, this is the outer shape of the city here, the blue one, and the red line was intended to be the first building phase. And as you see already here, so it really looks like a kashba, like it was meant to be to have like a big wall erected around here, and you have a smaller part of the city outside as well for very high level societal members. They have their own gated community here. And then we have the green fingers here inside. And there's already some of the aspects that they had. That you use this like a kind of a heat pump, a passive heat pump, that takes advantages from the daily changes between night and day of actually the heat inside the desert at day, and at night the coolness of the desert. And here's a different kind of height level. So if the desert cools down, the idea was that fresh air streams into that fingers, and from there, since it is pushing inside, the warm air is just streaming outside on the other sides, up in the air and going that directions. Okay, so maybe just a bit more forward to show you what are the actual form-based codes. Now you see as well, you have like this regulation of the heights directly attached to the ground plans. Then definition of certain kind of hue angles, psi or axis. And then we come more or less now. Okay, the traffic concept. So now we come to the first form-based codes. As you see here, there's a certain kind of ratios here. What is the overhang that you should have of your buildings? You need to have overhang, and different kind of street sections that you have always like a minimal distance to try to put the sunlight outside. So then you see as well, here's a green finger, which is a bit lower. Everything here is actually built on the desert soil, like a first story that you have here. And just up there, everything what is above ground is actually the top of the first story already. Okay, so now we come to the form-based codes, water features, that you're not really allowed to have water placed outside. So, orientation of the layout has been made as well with the sun, that you have a minimized ratio of sunlight in hours and the open public spaces. So it's kind of very minimized already here. The more bluer, the less sun. And this is the green finger, which is covered with palm trees, so that's okay. And this is one of the examples where they tried different kind of combination of massings to get here already lowered amount of sunlight on the facades. Because the lesser sunlight you have, of course, the lesser cooling you need. So, and now we come to certain kind of regulations that you have this kind of overhang, like these angles, that you have minimum shaded walkways with 2.50 meters as overhang, for instance. And here we have then all this passive technology, so this is as well form-based code. Where's the right placement for your passive, for your PV panels, for instance. So this shouldn't be self-shaded. So for instance, this one is right. It's of course wrong because you have of course all the PV panels here put into the dark. So this would be wrong. And this would be right. Instead of having like this canyons where no light comes to the palm trees, you instead have to widen the canyon, and you have to, for instance, for sunlight conversion into electrical energy, you have to place here photovoltaics as well as shading devices. So, and they use it just throughout the whole document now to define what are the key points in shapes, what should be maintained. It's not about the design later on, so design will be done by different people, the different architectural offices, all about the design guidelines or the form-based codes in that case, as well as the cladding of facades, different kind of conditions, and then example facades, and what is actually meant with that kind of facades. Since these facades have not just a functional meaning, they have as well a societal meaning. So, okay, so this is actually a very nice example of form-based code, I think so. So for you, now coming into the colder Altstädten, we have defined 7 areas in Altstädten where we will need to have like this kind of transaction, what I showed before. So we have one pieces in Altstädten which are clearly more tending to be or seeming to be more rural or suburban, like 7. And we have parts like 4 and 5, which are definitely more high density based. And then we have very interesting pieces like this area where we have like this family house hut units like the Schrebergärten, special water treatment plants, high density housing here, and some industry as well. So these are the 7 areas that we want that you will work on that. So we have to find out if we have enough of groups. I think a good threshold for group participation will be that we have 3 people within one group. We can talk about that if you want just to have 2 or maybe 4. That's no problem, but that should be the main ratio. So I see more or less like at the moment like we have like maximum 4 groups. And so we do not cover all of that areas, but if you want to do a what's the name? Wahlfacharbeit, elective thesis, then you're welcome to do as well one each for one, 2 for Wahlfacharbeit or 1. What do you think, Antje? Yeah, so we can negotiate on that. So if you need Wahlfacharbeit thesis elective, then you can just take another one and do the same again, and then we will find a way to have for you a very efficient thesis elective done. But of course we are expecting high quality on that as well. So a little bit more in detail here. So this area is actually separated by the highway and by the river Limmat, and it's actually a very interesting piece of land inside Zurich, since it has very high qualities but with very kind of diverse land uses. Somehow you could argue that the huts are not very efficient for the land use, could be used differently, because just a few people can live there with a quite less frequency of exchange of the formal owners of the small land use parcels. Otherwise, you have these water treatment plants directly next to a place which is has a very high quality. And then you have some attempts to create like a new urbanization just very next to very low density buildings. So that's kind of very interesting. And then just next to it, next to the Autobahn, you have this stripe where we have a little Dallas next to the main station of Altstetten, where we have the IBM, the BASF buildings, some very high quality buildings in terms at least of its materials, not maybe in architectural qualities, depends on the interpreter, and then very low quality buildings, but each maximizing just the building footprint on the parcel lot without any kind of interconnection in between to create something which could be like a urban block, which has its own identity. Really like every kind of company just took one of the blocks and just placed these buildings like they do now in China at the moment, and which is highly debated in Europe that you cannot do something like that. But even in our own, next to our door, it's very kind of similar. Then we have areas which are more like mediocre density, mid-density residential usage here, a bit more higher with some industrial usage, like so it's really like a very interesting mix here, because here they did a lot of attempts. So it's next to the stadium, a lot of attempts to increase actually the streetwise qualities of the block, but still it's a very interesting quarter here to make a analysis. And then we're getting more loose and more suburban here in this ones, with this community housings. And here, even here in this area, we have some farming houses at the end, or agraric usage, and there's like a gardening firm. So what we want to do with you in the coming exercise, so on Tuesday we will put the new exercise online with the smart code on next Monday after the lecture. We will have a talk about that, how to actually implement, how to do that, smart code analysis and implementation. So the idea would be that we have a short look on the building and zoning laws of Zurich, and have an idea what's actually allowed to build in Zurich. Therefore, we have a thesis elective as an input for you, if we make available online. Then you need maybe to go really in field to make the smart code survey, makes a classification. So we will show you next Monday how to pre-structure everything and how to do that later on. And from there, you should create a smart code pattern library by visiting the sites, by doing the right transact. And from there, the idea is that with set definitions in this catalog, you have the right input to come up with a grammar library, which you will have later on in the following exercise, the procedure modeling exercise, where you can actually convert that pictograms and schemes that you have derived here into the grammar library, and from there to create a parametric urban model later on. So. And this can be then used to do different kind of things, to make a reporting on the existing capabilities of this site. So is actually the building and zoning guidelines, are they actually overused, or are there still things that you can put inside? For instance, if we talk about redensification of Zurich, and to find new potentials where densification strategies could be implemented, how they could be done, and how maybe this zoning law should be changed. And of course, you can have a learning with adapting certain kind of these patterns to evaluate them as very, to have a very high quality or have very low quality. You can have that as a kind of feature attached to it, and as well use this as a kind of input. Okay, so I hope you're still awake. Thank you very much. I think it was the last slide. So, do you have any kind of further questions regarding that instrumentarium, this instrument of smart code, or coffee? Coffee. Okay. So what we have here right now is in our office. You can come by if you want to know more about that. We have different kind of literature here. You can just take it and sit outside and have it there as like a Lesesaal in that way. You can take it from us. We have a lot of materials that you can download to get further readings into the material as well. And we just publish it around noon, I guess. But you can download all the other things and stuff. So, okay. So now we can have a break, maybe half an hour. That's right for you? And then 11:15 we start again with the tutorial. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.